Hi, everybody, and welcome to January 24th, 2024's first third Tuesday talk of the year. I'm Chris Powicki, and I live in Brewster, and I'm the chair of the Cape Cod and Islands group of the Sierra Club. My colleagues on the executive committee include Morgan Peck, Mary Wagan, David Dow, Keith Lewison, um, Diane LeDuc, and hopefully I'm not forgetting anybody. And we're hoping to soon have a new member, Ella Sampu. Tonight's third Tuesday talk is bringing someone to you who we're always interested in hearing from, and also Mark Forrest has been involved with Joint Base Cape Cod for a couple of decades. First in a prior position as on the staff and ultimately as chief of staff for a former federal representative, Bill Delahunt. And Mark is also currently a Barnstable County Commissioner. So he serves on the executive board of the county. He is a member of the Yarmouth Select Board, and he's also the chair of the Cape Cod Conservation District. So Mark comes to these issues with a lot of history and a lot of important perspective. And Mark, the floor is yours. Thanks very much for coming.
Chris, thank you very much, and thank you for that very, very kind introduction. What I'd like to do tonight is to talk to you about, a proposal to update the master plan for the Joint Base Cape Cod. But what I'd like to do is spend a fair amount of time talking about the prior master plan and why it came about and how it developed and some of the key recommendations from it. Because in many respects, what we need to do, at least and again, I want to make it clear, I'm speaking mostly for myself as a public official. I'm not speaking for the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. I'm not speaking for the full Board of County Commissioners. I think, okay, there was some static there on the other end, but I think we got that under control. I'm speaking essentially for myself. I've been talking about this over the past couple of months at various county commissioner meetings. And, at the end of this, I can sort of explain sort of where we are today. But I do think it would be helpful to give you an overview of master planning. This is a bio, but Chris gave me the bio, so I'm going to skip over this. I'd like to at least focus in on one point is that I've been working on base issues since 1985 when I joined the staff of Congressman Gary Studs. And my first set of issues in working for Congressman Studs related to the cleanup of pollution out at the military base and developing a long-term plan to fund the cleanup effort, which has exceeded 1.5 billion. Back at the time that I was brought on to work on cleanup issues, there was really no known or established program to clean up pollution at military bases. And what came out of our experience with then the Mass Military Reservation was a program called the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. It was sort of the military equivalent of Superfund, in which funds were set aside specifically to deal with base cleanups. So while I was with Mr. Studs, we developed that national program, and we worked to make sure that our base on the Upper Cape was sort of at the top of the list for funding. And as I think most of you know or should know, is that we've had good success over the years in securing the funds that we need to sustain the cleanup effort. Now, there may have been disagreements over particular sites or proposed remedial actions, but funding has never really been a significant problem for us out at the military base. And that's because of a lot of work that was done almost 40 years ago during the era of Congressman Gary Studs. As some of you might recall, he was a very influential member of the House, and he used his clout and in terms of making sure that we had adequate funding and support for cleaning up not just this military bases, but bases around the country. And then when Congressman Delahunt came into office, he asked me to join his staff. Delahunt and then Governor Bill Weld. I would say the two of them had a strong interest in championing a master plan for the base that would essentially avert base closure. Back in the 90s, Delahunt had dealt with base closure up at the Naval Air Station in Weymouth. When he came in as a congressman, he believed that this base would have trouble staying open because of the divisiveness over the cleanup and issues related to just some of the work out at the base. So he was able to secure the support of the governor to do a master plan, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And then in the aftermath of the master plan, I worked on creating what is called the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. So thanks for covering my bio there, Chris. So I think to talk about a updated master plan, let's talk a little bit about, we're going to go back in history a bit. We're going to go back to 1997, 1998. So I want to just sort of talk briefly about why we needed a master plan back then. In 1985, the National Guard had proposed a number of military construction projects that met with significant opposition in the community, including a machine gun range. The towns were very upset over the slow pace of the cleanup back in the 80s. There was a controversy with the town of Falmouth. Falmouth had lost its municipal drinking water supplies in the Ashumet Valley, and there just seemed to be just ongoing controversy back in the 80s. Conservation Law Foundation, they actually went to court and stopped any military construction, and their call was for a comprehensive master plan and environmental impact statement. And so they basically battled it out with the Defense Department and the Guard for years until eventually we came up with a game plan in the 90s. So for an extended period of time, military construction out at the military base was pretty much put on hold. Now, you'll see this photograph. This is the picture on the front of the master plan. You'll see the military base. The areas that are colored up at the top, this green area and this larger sort of tan colored area and white area. This is roughly a 22,000 acre piece of real estate on the Upper Cape. And the northern green area is the now, what we would consider a largely conservation land. There's training that goes on there, but I want to, this map in the master plan sort of separates that area from the tanned area, which is called the cantonment area. It's an industrial area where most of the Air Guard, Coast Guard, and other tenant operations take place. So the master plan was designed to take a look at the entire facility, the entire area, to create a consensus vision for the base, to help address any potential base closure issues. The work was done, a lot of the work was done with funding from the state by the Cape Cod Commission. And there was a community working group that was established. This was a group of stakeholders representing the Upper Cape towns, community groups, and it sort of, as well as the military and the various commands out at the installation. And clearly, by having the community, the towns, the military at the table together, the general consensus was that this would be the best group of people to have at the table to sort of shape a consensus vision. And the Cape Cod Commission back then, it was led by Armando Carbonell. Some of you may remember him, but he was a very visionary director of the Cape Cod Commission. Now, before we go a little bit further into that, let's just give a little bit of background. People need to understand that Joint Base Cape Cod was created in the 30s. It was established because there was concern about inadequate facilities for military training at Camp Devens, mostly for the Army. And so in the 30s, Cape Cod was identified as a viable area for new training, military training. And the proposal itself, it's pretty well documented that when it was proposed back at the time in the 30s, it received a fair amount of opposition. Now, this is text that I took from the Joint Base Cape Cod website. I think it's reasonable. It's accurate. There was quite a bit of opposition, but over time, an extensive amount of money and resources were put into place to establish military training here, as well as the creation of a military reservation commission to oversee the development of the training facilities out there. And I should point out, and this is again from the base website, that up to 200,000 acres of land were authorized by the Pentagon. Think about that. 200,000 acres of land on Cape Cod were authorized for development for military training.
Well, he signed a bill to
So let me just, so I'll leave you with that for the moment. Now, what I'd like to do next is to go over some of the key findings in the 1998 master plan. And one of the things that I'm able to do is I can certainly send to Chris Powicki a copy of the executive summary and some of the master plan materials. I'm happy to send that out. If you put your if you get me your email address, I'd be happy to send you the executive summary of the base master plan. I'm not sure you want the whole document because it's like around 300 pages. So in the next slide, it really gets at, what are some of the environmental resources that need to be at least better understood on this real estate. So you can see here in this map on the right, you'll see the orange line is sort of the outline of the military base, and then the blue lines pretty much delineate at the very sort of in the very middle is the crown of the Sagamore lens. So this area in blue shows the Sagamore lens and the sort of the flow of groundwater from the lens. And as you can see, the Massachusetts Military Reservation, which we call today Joint Base Cape Cod, you'll see that it's sort of smack dab in the middle of the Sagamore lens, which is our principal source of water, drinking water. And you'll see the grade, the sort of the grade of the outflow. You'll see these little arrows right here, and they pretty much delineate the flow of water. So if you're really trying to understand the pollution that's on the base and why it's moving in the direction that it's moving, you really need to understand the basics of the Sagamore lens and how the water flows sort of downhill, down gradient into the surrounding towns. So in this portion of the base, can you see my cursor? Is that showing, Chris? So you'll see, and when you look at the cantonment area, the bottom part of the military reservation, you'll see.
Sorry, Mark. Yes, you can see your cursor. Sorry.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So in this area here, this is the cantonment area of the base. This is where most of the industrial activity was. So over the years, this is where most of the fuels, chemicals, and other substances were dumped into the ground. And as you can see, the arrows flow to the south into Mashpee predominantly and into Falmouth. And it's one of the reasons why Falmouth and Mashpee have had significant impacts. That's not to say there haven't been impacts in Sandwich and Bourne, but it gives you an indication why in this area here where a lot of the dumping took place, you can understand now why it's a lot of the pollution has found its way into Falmouth and the Mashpee and not into places like Sandwich and Bourne. There were sort of limited instances of contamination in the Sandwich and Bourne area. They certainly have been impacted, but not to the extent that Falmouth has. So when you look at master planning, one of the things you want to do, as we all know, is look at the environmental resources of the site you want to do master planning in. So in the early portions of the studies and investigative work for the master plan, we looked at the aquifer, the Sagamore lens. It's the largest lens of all of the 6 lenses that we have on Cape Cod. These are our underground water supply reserves or reservoirs. And during the planning process, it was pretty clear that this was sort of the equivalent of our underground Quabbin reservoir. The water for Bourne, Falmouth, Mashpee, Sandwich, Barnstable, and Yarmouth come principally from this area. And I should point out that the machine gun range, for people that are interested in where that is sort of in, I believe the proposal is in this area here. The site itself is also a significant area from other environmental characteristics. The northern 15,000 acres of the base represents probably one of the largest pine barren areas in the Northeast. By the state environmental agencies, it's considered ecologically significant habitat. And not only is it the source of water for drinking water supplies, current and future, but it's also a source of water for 153 vernal pools, 180 freshwater ponds, 20 streams and rivers. And a lot of the water works its way, or it all works its way eventually to the shoreline, as well as impacting cranberry bogs. Because of the significance of it, these were all reasons that went into the drafting of legislation to turn at least the northern 15,000 acres of the reservation into conservation land called the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. So again, the point we wanted to establish is how significant it is. So now when you look at this map, this can be very, very confusing. The green area is the reserve, but the little triangles that you see here are what we call public water supplies. Now, remember now, this plan was done in 1998. So some of the triangles have changed. We've probably lost a few and probably have gained a few. But by and large, at the time this plan was being developed, the triangles were where we mapped out all of the water supply sites, the public drinking water supply areas, and the purple shaped areas are what we call zones of contribution. So here's the case in Bourne. You have 4 public water supply wells here. There's a public water supply here. And this is the land area that contributes to those drinking wells. Same in Sandwich. As you can see in Sandwich has water supplies, but the land area that contributes to the water comes from the reserve. These wells here, these are relatively newer wells. These are wells that were created to provide drinking water supplies. They pretty much feed into what is called the Water Supply Cooperative for the Upper Cape, but it's the same all the way around. You can see here on the southern end, there are these zones of contribution all along the south, connecting wells, and you can see the relationship to the ponds and wells. So it's a very complex hydrological system. And a lot of our knowledge is about the workings of the system really comes from a lot of the investigative work done during the cleanup. This is a drawing showing the little red circles are sites that have identified as future water supply sites. Now, this was a study that was done back in 1997, 98, during the time frame of the master plan being developed. And the point of this is to show that there are a number of other areas that have potential for future water supply sites. A number of them have been taken off because we found contamination or groundwater pollution issues there. But if the goal is still to clean up and remediate the pollution, you can see that they're, if assuming we're successful, and I believe we will be successful in providing substantial cleanup out here, that there's, again, this is a significant resource for Cape Cod in terms of water supplies. So on here to the right, I just want to point out that the legislature, when it created the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, we also created what is called the Upper Cape Water Supply Cooperative. The approach that we took in terms of creating the management structure is to really replicate what was done out of the Quabbin Reservoir, because in our estimation, it sort of made a great deal of sense, since that system worked well, to have one body, governing body, in this case, the Environmental Management Commission, overseeing the reserve itself and making sure that it's protected, which is what they have a comparable type of organization out at the Quabbin, to have that along with an organization that extracts the water based on the flows approved by the governing body of the commission. So in this case, now with the Quabbin, it's the MWRA that extracts the water. So I guess our equivalent is the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, or excuse me, the cooperative. The cooperative needs to get permission from the reserve governing body, the EMC, and the EMC approves how much water can be taken from the reserve. I know I'm covering a lot of ground here, so what I'd like you to do is, if you have questions, I'm glad. Let me get through this. I need about 5 more minutes, and then I'll stop, and I'm happy to go back and explain or clarify things here. For some of you who've been involved in base cleanup activities or have served on the plume, the cleanup action team or the cleanup review teams, this is one of the plume maps. And this is a map that's done periodically, usually every 6 months to a year. There's a new plume map showing where on the base the various groundwater plumes are or have been. I have, since working on base pollution issues since 1985, I have a large number of these maps. And this is a map that's probably about a year old or a couple of years old. And the point of it is that clearly military operations and training had a great deal to do with the pollution out here. Because the soil is sandy and highly permeable, pollution would flow, from the core of the Sagamore Lens out into the surrounding towns. We've had numerous water supplies, numerous wells impacted by contamination. And the Defense Department, and by and large, has been responsible in working with the towns in terms of either assisting in getting treatment on the well sites or at the well sites, or in getting replacement water supplies. So this is a plume map, excuse me, it's from 2018. And as I mentioned before, the remediation cost is exceeded 1.5 billion. This is a map today. I show this principally because I want you to see this sort of pinkish area. This is the one of the more recent challenges, and this was a map that I received at a briefing on the base regarding PFAS. And I'm not going to go into detail about the characteristics of PFAS, but this pink area is where the PFAS plume of contamination emanating from one of the fire training areas, how it's spread. And as you can see, it's a pretty large area. And steps have been taken to at least provide funding to remediate pollution from this plume at the water supply sites. I believe EPA is looking at rules and regulations to deal with how to address other pollution-related issues with PFAS. But this gives you a sense of the extent of it. So, and this map is, I think, just 2.5 years old. This is the machine gun range. I'm just going to pass over this. I think you've had enough meetings and discussions about the machine gun range, but as we all know, it's in a significant area out on the base. It's located right in this facility right here, right in this portion of the base. And as you can see, when you look at the installation, it's in a fairly important part of Zone 2's in water supply resources. As I mentioned before, the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve was formally established in March 5th, 2002. The law more or less makes it very, very clear that it's there for the permanent protection of the drinking water supplies of Cape Cod and the wildlife habitat of the property that's there, of the reserve. And it establishes an environmental management commission to oversee, monitor, and evaluate and make sure that all military and other activities on the reserve are consistent with the preservation of the drinking water supplies and the wildlife habitat of the reserve. So why do we need to think about master planning going forward? Well, as we know, there's talk about 600 acres of the base being made available for housing. The Air Guard has been talking about accessing land, shrinking their footprint so that they can become a much more efficient operation out there. We have a wastewater treatment plant that's been acquired, or at least the use of it's been acquired by a private vendor. In recent years, the county has studied finding ways to work with the towns as well as the base in expanding regional municipal waste, addressing those challenges with recycling and composting. There have been proposals to examine the viability of an anaerobic digester, perhaps. It's been suggested in some of these studies that perhaps Joint Base Cape Cod might be an appropriate location. There have been changes in rail access to the base. I'm not going to go into the details of those, but I think that's an issue that's out there that I know that it's come up for some discussion. As a county commissioner, we would like to be able to expand our alternative septic system test center out there. It's on the southern end of the base near the current treatment plant. We want to be able to test other pollution remediation technologies, and the center itself has been incredibly successful. There are future needs related to the Coast Guard and the National Guard. Those need to be looked at. And there have been prior studies that have been done regarding land use management out there that probably should be brought into the discussion. For the military itself and for the tenants at the base, one of the biggest challenges they're wrestling with is just the high cost of operating an airport, the base airport, and the issues associated with that. And it's been suggested in the past that there's some other needs that the military has beyond just some of the training needs, but veterans health care has been discussed in the past as something that ought to be looked at and expanded upon, particularly since southeastern Massachusetts is perhaps where the greatest concentration of elderly who have served in the military seem to be located. And there's also a desperate need for military housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, let's not forget the fact that there are those that serve that need access to affordable housing. In doing master planning, this is a map of the cantonment area. And as you can see, it's a significant airport area here. These are the flight zones and clear zones. So each of the activities that goes on out at the installation has its own set of requirements and own set of land use guidelines. And so when you look at a military installation, the last time around, what was one of the goals was to make sure that any of the new uses would be compatible with adjacent uses. And that's an important consideration going on. The other factor, obviously, is that with all of these other issues sort of in play, the need to look at them in their totality, not look at them in silos or in stovepipes, so to speak. So this would be largely, at least in the master planning that we need to do going forward, this is the area that really needs to be concentrated on. This is where many of the issues, many of the points that I just mentioned previously, this is where they're taking place. That's the geographic area that needs to be looked at. So I'm going to stop right there. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop right there. We have tasked as county commissioners, we have tasked the Cape Cod Commission to work on a scope of work for a master plan update. And they're in the process of putting that together. We're going to bring that up for discussion at a future county commissioner meeting. The commissioners have expressed interest in exploring this topic further. And so my hope is that within the next few weeks, we'll have a scope of work, a budget, a schedule that we can make available for some public discussion. I'm sure people will have ideas about the kinds of things that need to be looked at in a master planning process. And so obviously we're going to be interested in hearing what people have to say. And I think tonight's meeting is more or less sort of an opportunity to discuss, to get input, to get feedback, to hear what people have to say. The initial feedback has all been positive. I think many people recognize that when we did the master plan in 1998, there were a lot of good things that came out of it. It served an incredibly important purpose in terms of shaping a consensus. In the aftermath of that plan, support for the base, support for the cleanup, support for a lot of things out there picked up significantly. And it helped us in terms of at least having a blueprint so that funds could be reinvested in the installation to better protect public health, to improve environmental infrastructure out there. In the aftermath of the master plan, we actually had a site identified where a future fire station can go. So the fire station benefited from that. The jail benefited from that, and a host of other activities have benefited from that. But that plan was done when we had an airport out there with jets coming in and out. The jets are gone. They were impacted by a base closure commission that was commenced in 2005. And today, the jets aren't there. The Air Guard mission has been in the news quite a bit lately. I know that's added to some of the concern about the future viability of the Guard out there. I really can't address that question, but I understand it's one of the concerns that fuels some of the interest in this. So we need to look at the future and how to sustain sustain a military base that also is a good, it can serve also as a good partner with the surrounding towns. And so our needs and the needs of the base can be served collectively. So let me just stop right there. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I'm happy to address them.
Mark, thanks very much for that comprehensive overview of history and sort of the drivers and the need for a master plan going forward. We've got a couple people who have their hands raised. I'm just going to ask one quick question, and then we'll go to David Dow. And my question is, how has the JBCC leadership responded to the proposal for a master plan, if there's been any response at all?
I brought the topic up at our last military civilian advisory group meeting, which was held, I believe, a couple of months ago. And I brought it up because we had on the agenda that night a discussion of the housing proposal. And one of the concerns that I've expressed about this major development of housing is the need to have the community participate in the whole discussion, to have municipal officials involved in the discussion, because a development of that size is quite significant. And there's been discussion about literally carving up the base, taking a huge section of the base, taking it out from within the boundaries of the reservation itself, and then literally allowing private developers to take that on. And that needs to really be, and that task, from what I understand, has been turned over to mass development. And I think the observation I was making at our last meeting is that, listen, we need to look at initiatives like this with all the other things that are going on out there, not in isolation, but collectively, comprehensively. And now, and I made it very clear that now would be a good time to update the master plan, and no one objected. And I saw even among military commanders, people nodding their heads. So we haven't presented anything yet to them to chew on and to comment on, but that'll be happening soon enough. But so far, the interest has been positive.
Great, thanks for that. David, you had a question. David Dow.
This is David Dow. I'm a resident of Falmouth. And I had a question about the PFAS levels in the shellfish and finfish in the Shumat and Johns Pond. They've been polluted by some of the plumes from Joint Base Cape Cod. And I was wondering, since there's no standards for what the safe levels are, what kind of work has been done either by the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs or the state legislature to develop safe levels of PFAS and finfish and shellfish, since a lot of people catch them from those two ponds to put food on the table, especially the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe.
That's an excellent point, David. I didn't come prepared tonight to talk about some of the public health issues, but they clearly need to become more of a priority. The current regulatory environment puts enormous focus on drinking water supplies. That's why we've seen, in response to the PFAS contamination, the Air Force step in to provide funding to Mashpee and Falmouth to provide treatment on the wells that have been impacted by that PFAS plume. So they've stepped up and done that. And, as county commissioners, we've played a role in sort of rattling some cages in the Defense Department to get them focused on it. But they've stepped up. But some of these other broader concerns are duly noted. They're certainly on our radar screen. So thanks for raising.
I just want to mention that the Silent Spring Institute has a joint project with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe to measure PFAS concentrations in the animals they obtain from hunting and fishing. So there's going to be some good background information on the concentrations. It's just a matter of what people consider the safe levels might be.
Agreed. Thank you.
John Schuster, go ahead, please. Your question.
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Go ahead.
Just trying to start my video. Um, can you turn the volume down, please? Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Mark. I mean, there's so much in this presentation, and it's just it's so useful and relevant to on so many levels. It's great to have the background going back to the very beginning. I am wondering if it'll be possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I mean, I've just been taking screenshots as I go along so I can review them later, but if it is,
I'm happy to do that, John. And Chris, I'll follow your lead if you'd like me to send you the PowerPoint, and then you can distribute to your members and others that might be interested. Happy to just give that to you and let you take care of that. Or
That sounds fine, Mark. Thank you. Always good to
and
delegate. I'm glad to do it.
thanks.
just and one thing in particular though is my wife and I are extremely interested in the machine gun range issue, and when it came to that was one slide that I wasn't able to capture, so I was wondering if you could call that slide back up again, but also I'm just wondering if you could speak to the machine gun range issue a little bit. I mean, you started the presentation given the background on the creation of the reservation and the importance, obviously, right from the beginning, of protecting the sole source aquifer. And just, I think a lot of us would be very interested to hear your take on machine gun range, anything that you might have to share.
Well, it's important to note that when the master plan was sort of in the sort of the final stages of development, Governor Solucci had a chance to review the document before it was finalized, and this discussion is actually in the executive summary that I'm going to send to Chris Powicki. So I'm going to send to Chris the executive summary of the master plan done in 1998. I'm going to send him a PDF version of this PowerPoint, so he'll have that information. But in the executive summary is a discussion about why the Governor Solucci then pulled a number of projects out, because he had learned, based on reading reading a lot of the work, is that how significant that northern part of the military base was in terms of water supply. And so when he asked those involved in the writing of the report whether or not there was a good idea to put a machine gun range out there, now the site is a bit different, I believe, but nonetheless, he vetoed the machine gun range back in 1998, and so that project was shelved. And I thought Governor Solucci had very good reasons for it back then. His environmental affairs secretary felt the same way, and that's why we haven't really seen that project until recently. And so, and now you can, I think it helps understand why it's so controversial. This portion of that area, it's the water supply reserve. It's to be protected as a reserve. If a machine gun range of that size were proposed in the watershed of the Quabbin, no one would think about it. It would get soundly defeated. It would be considered inconsistent with watershed planning and management in that area. So, if it's a bad idea in the Quabbin watershed, then it should be a bad idea on Cape Cod's watershed.
Exactly.
And
Mark,
the commissioners
sorry,
have written, if I can say just, John, one other point. Yeah, I mean, the county commissioners, along with a host of other municipal officials and regional officials, and obviously you folks with the Sierra Club, have pretty much been on record against this proposal. And it's important to note that there is a similar facility being built at Fort Devens. So it's not like there's not a reasonable alternative. There is.
John, did you have anything
Mark.
else?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Tom Sullivan, you're next up, please. Please take down your hand if you're done asking questions also, David and John. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Mark knows who I am. We go back a long way. I live here in Yarmouth. My connection with the base goes back further than Mark. I was first stationed up there in 1969 until 1971. Okay, I used to watch the Connies. Those are the old reconnaissance aircraft. I used to watch them flush their wings out on the ramp. And of course, all that fuel and stuff went into the ground. Similar to what Cape Air was doing at the Hyannis Airport until just recently. I'm curious to hear, I know about the cleanup. I've been monitoring the cleanup. I was a cop at the base. I was certified as hazmat. So I'm very familiar with it. About the filters and how they do the cleaning, the pulling the water. But what I'm not hearing, and this is what my point will be, about the testing of the water. Okay. There has been, and there is, a very high cancer rate amongst those who worked at the base. I have 27 friends and associates right now, and this list is getting longer, who have died of different cancers, pancreatic cancers, esophageal cancers, brain cancers, blood cancers. These are all coming from members who worked in the industrial area of the 102nd. Nothing's been said about that. And I'll be added to the list because I've been diagnosed recently with a liver cancer, similar to what is coming out from Camp Lejeune. And I'm presently in treatment up at Dana-Farber. What is going to be done about the testing of water? That water is polluted up there. Has been probably since the 1970s. We drank the water. No one said anything about it. Even in the mid-1980s, when, as I said, Mark got involved with the congressman. We watched it. There were demonstrations and stuff. None of us had any opinion of it. No, they knew the water was polluted, but yet they didn't tell us to take bottled water. 3 days ago, I was talking to a guy who works at the Coast Guard station. They don't drink regular water from the base. They drink bottled water. As far as putting housing up there, you'd be putting housing in a situation similar to Love Canal, upstate New York. Now, hope anybody remembers that fiasco out there. Just to explain it, Love Canal, homes were built right over a hazardous waste dump. And they put wells in the ground and pumped the water right out, right through the hazardous waste. A lot of people were sick from that. Like we get a lot of people in the wing right now, former members of the wing, who are suffering from different cancers. I didn't believe it at first, but when I started putting a list together and talking to other members who are now retired from there, yeah, it's serious and it's long. So if you're going to do a master plan, maybe you should put master plan in why these people got sick and are dying right now from contamination of the base. I talked to All Oncology here, met with them at the Cape Cod Hospital. They're familiar with the incidents out there, very much so. I don't think there should be any plans for the base as of right now until this is resolved. And that includes machine gun range, the 102nd, or anything. Shut the base down. Move the Coast Guard out of there. Those people in the housing area shouldn't be drinking no water. Coast Guard could go to Provincetown. They could expand the facilities down there. They have an airport down there, runways to handle those helicopters and stuff. But that's where I stand. And I think a lot of people that I work with will say the same thing. Let that base up there. If you want to preserve the water, first of all, you got to test it. All right, the PFAS, that's another matter. That's being looked into. Several bases, including Westover, Hanscom, Fort Devens, and Westfield are all coming in with PFAS. And there's going to be some type of action taken about that. I've been in contact with a firm out of New York. They are looking into it. It might have another Camp Lejeune up here because I think we've got a situation here that's as big, if not bigger, than the Camp Lejeune poisoning of our Marines that were down in the Carolinas. So if you're going to talk about, you're talking about everything off the base, which is very much concerning. Yes, there's a lot of pollution. But what about on the base and the people out there work there? And the present people that are living there in the housing? I don't foresee that anything should be done up there, and I would oppose that. I don't know, I'll leave that open for discussion, but that's some insight from someone who actually was there and has now got sick from because of it. And I've talked to other people. I got prostate cancer as another one. And I'll add one more, bladder cancer. These are the people, bladder cancer, esophageal cancer, pancreatic and blood cancers all came from people I directly worked with. We were cops up there and we got poisoned. So I would like
Tom,
to add
thank you.
that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that personal testimony. I think your point has been hammered home, and it should be that there needs to be a comprehensive assessment of what's going on the base for the people who live there. And I would hope that would be part of the master plan. If Mark, you could respond to that, then we can go on to the next question with the time waning. Thanks.
I agree with you, Tom. I think I'm first of all, let me just say as a friend, I'm sorry that you're in the situation that you're in, but I would agree with you that I think we've overlooked and have neglected really to pay attention to the health impacts of those that have served. It's a huge issue, and we need to treat it much more seriously. I would echo Chris's point that in doing any work out here, we really need to take a look at the public health impacts and address them because they're serious. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Edward Miller, please. You're next. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks. I'm calling in from Cambridge. And I've got a special place in my heart for Cape Cod. That's where my parents met. Um, but anyway, my question is sort of more of a technical question. I'm wondering when they're doing the testing to measure the contamination, if they're doing it like right at the wellhead where it's coming out, or if they tried to distribute the testing sites across a wider area. And I'm also interested in who is doing the testing. Do they contract out to a private firm, or would the Army Corps of Engineers get involved in this, or those are really what I'm interested in.
Well, first of all, it's my understanding, Ed, that the water supplies that are used currently, that is the military is actually getting its drinking water from the Upper Cape Water Supply Cooperative. The wells on the base have all been shut down. So, and I think it's because of the reasons that Tom Sullivan raised, is because of identifying contamination. Now, how they tested and the frequency of testing and the chemicals that were tested for over the years, I really can't speak to. That's not my field. That's not my background. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of people that lived there for many years were exposed to things that they should not have been exposed to. But today, the water supplies that feed the military are the same water supplies that are basically, feed some of the municipal uses. They get tested and scrutinized by and again, the cooperative is made up of the municipal water departments. And so they follow the same protocols that they do for the municipal supplies. So the Upper Cape towns get supplies from a variety of sources, but as you can see, this area of the Upper Cape is significant in terms of water quality. And so, but the testing itself is done at the site where the wells come, where the water supply feeds into the pumping station and before it gets into the distribution system.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that question, Ed. Sandy, go ahead, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, thanks. I'm Sandy Famous Silva from Falmouth, and I lived in West Falmouth since 1984. my well was capped because it was in the line of progression of one of the plumes of contamination heading toward West Falmouth Harbor. And I've been involved with this issue since the mid-1980s. And I also have, a year and a half ago, I was diagnosed with 2 different cancers, breast cancer and thymoma, which is a mass on my thymus gland, which may have been there for 5 to 10 years. So my concerns about cancer, I think, are very well founded and need to be continued to be pursued. But I wanted to draw your attention to one of your slides where you talked about the March 5th, 2002 state law that was established, charging the commission to ensure the permanent protection of the drinking water supply and wildlife habitat. And that the commission would be overseeing, monitoring, and evaluating that all military and other activities are consistent with this purpose. I am very concerned about the conduct of the military since we've been aggressively following this issue. They self-designate as being the custodians of fragile environments. So they are the caretakers of the environment. It's like I don't know, the fox guarding the hen house. They promote their own agenda when it's to their advantage. They hide from the public, fail to disclose, for example, that they were continuing the machine gun range proposal and did not tell us, the public. They are very good with their dog and pony show that they bring to the select boards and give us a very glossy picture of what's going on out there. So I really am concerned that we need to be in control of the narrative and be very watchful and mindful that the agenda of the personnel out there is not necessarily the agenda of the citizens of the Cape. Thank you.
If I could just respond, Sandy, thank you for your comments. And I think you echo and underscore something that really needs to be looked at, and that is that the public health impacts. That really, when the military looked at public health impacts from the installation and related to contamination issues, the comprehensive look was really focused, in the 1980s. That's really the last time, the 80s and early 90s. It needs to be. I think an argument can be made just based on what we're hearing tonight, is that we need to take a deeper dive into this area and really better examine it and understand it. I mean, we knew at the time, I know that when I worked for Congressman Studs in 1985, we knew we had a very serious problem. We knew we had a very serious issue. But I think if we've learned anything, is that just when you think you know everything, something pops up that tells you that you need to do more. The contaminants have changed over the years. We didn't even know what PFAS was, back in the 80s and the 90s. We hadn't really heard about it. And it's only been recently, when we've developed much better technology to detect some of these contaminants. That's the other thing, Sandy, is that some of these contaminants, the technology just wasn't there to detect this stuff. And now that as technology gets better, we're able to find other things and other contaminants. We talk about contaminants of emerging concern. A lot of that has to do with just our ability to understand and find this stuff in our water supply. So at Barnstable County, we're investing in new lab facilities so we can do a better job at testing contaminants of emerging concern. So at the county, we're making those investments. But I think the discussion about the health impacts, that's one of my big takeaways tonight, is that we really need to sort of examine what you and what Tom Sullivan, have said, because I can safely say that it hasn't really been properly looked at, and it has to be. And let me also say, the other lesson in this, I'm looking at the size of the crowd here that's tonight, and it's an indication of a very strong interest in what's going on out there. And if there's one thing that we've learned over the years, in the roughly 40 years that I've been dealing with these issues, what I've learned is that grassroots advocacy, the environmental organizations, it's critical that they continue to monitor and do oversight and aggressively stay on top of these issues. If we didn't have an active citizens groups, back in the 80s, we wouldn't have had nearly any of the much of the progress that we've had to date. It really has. It's been the bird dogging and the oversight of citizens groups, activists, people from the individual communities raising the questions that you've been raising, Sandy, and others. Sierra Club has been active. I have to tip my hat to the Sierra Club, APCC, and there are other groups, on the Upper Cape that have really taken a strong interest in what's going on out there. All I can say is that we just need to keep it up.
Walter, your question, please.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Mark, for your leadership on this issue. I don't know it as well as it sounds like some of the people on the call do, so I just had some preliminary questions about the actual governance structure for the management. What is the formal governance structure for the management of the property? And who has the decision-making authority in which lanes? And also, is the land belong to the state and is leased to the federal government? Or what is the sort of status of the land? And
Those are great questions, Walter. They're excellent. First of all, in terms of the ownership of the land, most of the land that this military reservation consists of is state-owned land. The land that is federally owned is the National Cemetery. We have a National Cemetery in Bourne. So in the far western section of the installation, let me pull my map up if I can bring it up.
I know where the cemetery is.
Okay, you know where the cemetery is. So the cemetery over here, and a portion of the airport. The rest of it is all state-owned land. Now, what the state has done is it's entered into leases and a whole complex array of agreements with the Commonwealth, and then licenses back. You almost need a law degree to figure out the back and forth. It's very confusing. But the bottom line is this is land principally owned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I think it's safe to say that the Commonwealth has really been derelict in its duty of providing diligent oversight of the stewardship of this land, particularly when we learned, of the significance of it from an environmental point of view. I think if there's a lesson that I've learned in this, in addition to the importance of advocacy and grassroots activism, it's been that the state typically falls asleep from time to time, and most of the time, quite frankly. I mean, I have found myself in numerous meetings praising Governor Weld and former Governor Cellucci for their vision, for their leadership on this issue. And who would have thought, you'd have someone known as a Democrat, on Cape Cod praising, a conservative Republican. But you know what? There was a time on Cape Cod during that period of time, we had everybody, Republicans, Democrats, vegetarians, Rotarians, libertarians, I don't care what your pedigree was, everybody seemed to be focused on protecting, doing the cleanup and protecting this resource. But we're losing that. So it's going to take this kind of interest, the kind of activism that we had once before. We got to revive that and sustain it.
so I would encourage you to in your tick list for the master planning to include a section related to governance structures and improvement in that process.
Yeah,
And
the
then
governance
the other question-
structures, that, if I could just finish, Walter, the governance structures, there's the Environmental Management Commission that's principally responsible for the reserve. So that area in green that constitutes the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, it's the Environmental Management Commission that's responsible for overseeing that. The commission consists of the commissioner of the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, the commissioner of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, and then the commissioner of Fish and Game. So these are the three principal land stewards and land managers related to the environment in Massachusetts. So we've got the right people. It's just that they need to pay closer attention. Now their staff, the commission has a staffer, Len Pinot, who's also the base cleanup manager, and he's got his hands full. But that commission this is now their watch, and they have an important job. Now, the the portions of the property that are principally military in nature, there's what is called the Massachusetts Military Reservation Commission that was established in the 30s, and it's just a handful of Massachusetts Guard personnel. And, an argument can be made to, also, review that group to see, how they've performed and whether or not that needs to be changed. An argument could be made there as well.
Well, I think those are excellent suggestions. But my last question was, if I'm not quite sure how the watershed, what kind of level of actual protection it has. If it's a wetland area, for example, in Massachusetts, we have regulations associated with wetlands protection. But if I can't understand how a machine gun base or range could be put in a so-called protected area.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the county commissioners came out against it. We did a legal analysis. We hired a very prominent law firm, Gregor McGregor, and his team. They looked at it. They've actually written a fairly detailed legal opinion to us, identifying all the deficiencies in terms of environmental compliance. And as commissioners, we voted to, put the Commonwealth on notice that we prepare to litigate if they move forward with this project. So your point's well taken. It shouldn't be. It's amazing that it's getting this level of attention and discussion, but it's totally inconsistent with the establishment of the reserve. Governor Cellucci made that call in 1998, and it's protected under Article 97 of the Constitution. I know there are a few folks here that are on and joining us tonight that are very familiar with what Article 97 is all about. And recently, the Sierra Club and other environmental groups worked to get through the legislature added protections for Article 97 lands. So there are added measures that have been incorporated into state law to protect these lands. So, obviously, these are all on the books, but they, oftentimes they don't get applied until you have to go into court and litigate. So hopefully we can stop the project. But if it does, if it starts, we're prepared to go to court.
Thanks for that answer, Mark, and those questions, Walter. We're going to have one more question from you, Allison. I'm just going to jump in real quick, though, to follow up on the conversation there. So the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve is state-owned land. If I'm correct, the governor is actually the commander of the Massachusetts Air National Guard. The governor's three lead environmental agency heads are in charge of the Massachusetts or in charge of the Environmental Management Commission. So what exactly is stopping Governor Healy and the officials under her from stopping this project tomorrow? And is Governor Healy getting the pressure after a full year in office that she needs on this issue?
Well, that's kind of I haven't talked to her about this particular issue, and I'm not quite frankly sure how much. I know Governor Baker was getting a lot of letters and calls and messages. I'm not sure what kind of mail the governor has received. In our correspondence, we've directed our correspondence to the Environmental Affairs Secretary. And from what I can gather, there is an ongoing review by the EPA to determine whether or not the range itself complies with the provisions under the Safe Drinking Water Act that protects sole source aquifers. And as everybody connected with the Sierra Club knows, EPA came out with a draft finding saying that this project was inconsistent. It was a threat. And I think, quite frankly, a number of folks are waiting on the EPA to have a final determination. And when that's coming out is unknown. Hopefully it'll come out soon. And that could be, a big nail in the coffin.
And if not, then it's back to the governor, I think. So Allison, please, a question. And this will be the last question tonight. We're a little bit over, but such great content. I think it's worthwhile.
Just a quick, more sort of mundane question about access, public access to the base. And, years ago before 9/11, you were able to drive through the base and there was a lot of other opportunities for public access. And I just wonder if a new master plan is in the works, if that is on the table at all, whether it be for driving through for recreation, for the potential of a new rail corridor through modern rail corridor through there, et cetera. Is that under discussion?
I think it should be. It was under discussion. It was discussed the last time, and I think 9/11 certainly changed everything. But it's certainly worth bringing that topic up again. Public access. There's some areas on the base that are just incredibly beautiful. Just even from a passive recreation point of view, there's some areas that are just stunning in terms of the views. But and there are other areas that I know. There's been always there's been a longstanding interest in access to cut through to avoid the canal traffic. That's been controversial, quite frankly. When it came up before, it's come up several times, and usually it's the residents of the Snake Pond Road area that usually get very worked up about that, and have been able to convince people that it wouldn't be a good idea. So it's an important subject, and I'm sure it will be part of this effort to update the plan.
Thanks for that question, Allison, and thanks to Mark especially for bringing a wealth of knowledge and history to us here tonight, and to 50 some members of the Cape Cod community who are really concerned about the base's future and what that means for the Cape's future and some of the issues we're facing. So I think this was a really useful session, Mark. Very much appreciate it. People can reach out to myself, and I'll share Mark's slides to whoever is interested, and also make available a copy of the executive summary of the master plan. And so with that, I'd like to wish you all a great night and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody.